Welcome back to the Food on Demand podcast, where we dish up insights on the future of food relating to off-premises operations and the overall digital dining experience. I'm Bernadette Heyer, managing editor, and we are back again after a bit of a hiatus with releasing some interviews from our Food on Demand conference at the Bellagio in Las Vegas in May, which went amazing. And now we are back with our regular cadence with a great interview today coming up with Rash, the CEO of Coco Robotics. But first, we're going to get into our quick bites. So, hello, Adam.
Hello, Bernadette. It is great to be back with you. Yes, I'm Adam Wahlberg, Associate Editor here at Food on Demand. And just a quick reminder, make sure to check out our weekly newsletter. It comes out on Thursdays. Subscribe on our website. We'd love to see you there.
Yes, please do, as always. So my quick bite newsy item this week is a story I wrote on Red Lobster rejoining Olo to power its tech stack. And the timing's interesting given Red Lobster declared bankruptcy last year and wasn't doing so hot. But then it was able to actually emerge from Chapter 11 bankruptcy later that year. But part of this whole revitalization strategy and getting Red Lobster back into popularity did come with needing to look at its tech overhaul and its tech stack. And so they used to be with Ola before, but now they have joined them again, really bringing in tools like AI-driven sentiment tracking and integrated catering. And so that's big. That couples in with new menu innovation they're doing, like the popular new seafood boil to draw guests coming back. But, with doing new promotions, new loyalty, new rebranding comes how do you reach out to guests? How do you speak to guests? And how do you know what they want? And with Olo really kind of powering that back end data and so forth, I think they're in a good space. So we'll continue to watch it. It's kind of in relation to the build versus buy debate we see, where brands are either partnering with outside vendors and or building their own tech stack. And what I'm seeing is most operators are in some form of hybrid solution. But that being said, we'll keep an eye out on what Red Lobster is doing and check out that article to learn more.
Always interested in Red Lobster. I'm always hoping they'll bring back all-you-can-eat shrimp, but I don't think they will. But this Olo thing sounds like a good move for them. So yeah, on my plate this week was I had a chance to talk to the CEO of Wahlburgers, which I was delighted to do because I'm a Wahlberg, although I'm not related, and yet I get asked that a lot, and I wish I was related. Anyway, so I was talking to Randy Sharp. Again, he's the CEO. And I was really interested in their decision that they announced earlier in this year to kind of part ways with the Hy-Vee supermarket chain. They've been in partnership with them for 8 years. Hy-Vee, until the split, was running 79 Wahlburgers locations inside their stores. So it made a lot of news when they decided to no longer continue their work together. So I asked Randy Sharp about it, and I thought he'd kind of dodge around it a little bit. It's maybe a sensitive topic, but no, he answered it pretty directly. He said, listen, they're not restaurant operators. And I think he kind of took issue just operationally with kind of the feel of going in, and it felt like they're running Wahlburgers like a grocery counter. And so for now, they just decided it doesn't really feel like Wahlburgers, and I imagine the revenue picture wasn't great, so they moved on. But it's got me thinking, I really want to keep an eye on these partnerships. You see all kinds of interesting partnerships popping up, but this whole one specifically to what Wahlburgers' experience was. I know Walmart has recently announced that they're bringing in Wiener Schnitzel stands, and I thought, well, it's a creative partnership, but it makes me wonder if they're asking the same questions. If the Wiener Schnitzel top brass is going in, is like, does this feel like a Wiener Schnitzel, or does it feel like I'm at a Walmart food court or something? So, it'll be interesting to keep an eye on these type of partnerships, which ones thrive and which ones kind of flounder. But I don't overlook the piece. So I'll keep an eye on these partnerships. They're popping up all the time, and it's fun to see which ones make sense and which ones seem maybe a little impulsive.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you highlighted this because we do sometimes see these chains go into grocery stores or non-traditional locations and wondering if they'll work or if that was a good move. Yeah, you mentioned the Wiener Schnitzel, and then also I think about Wonder. We talk a lot about Wonder. They opened up in like four Walmarts, their food hubs. So we'll keep an eye on the how those continue to combine and keep you all updated.
Excellent. We shall do it.
All right, now it is time for our guest interview with Rash, the CEO and founder of Coco Robotics. Thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Really excited to have you. Food on Demand has followed Coco's journey for the past years, but it's the first time I was able to get you on the podcast and interview you one-on-one. So I'm really excited to dive into your journey and so forth. But starting off, for anyone who is unaware, can you give me an overview of who you are, your role, and what led you to starting this company?
Yeah, I started this with my co-founder, Brad, about 5 years ago. We were at UCLA together. We actually met at a surf team meeting. So we're both competing on the UCLA surf team and both decided to do a hard pivot from surfing into robotics. But we had started experimenting with AI and self-driving research when we were at UCLA. And so we'd been doing this for a few years. We started this kind of autonomous research division of a lab at UCLA during our second year. And then as we were graduating, we just had formed a lot of opinions about how to make this useful, how to get this out into the world. And we really wanted to start a robotics company that could actually start, servicing merchants and doing useful things on a faster path than we thought other companies were going to take.
Yeah, that's quite the pivot from surfing to owning and running a huge robotics company. So, can you kind of tell me about why the decision for robotic sidewalk delivery? I know you said you were interested in AI and automation in general, but what was the reasoning behind that avenue?
We'd seen, I grew up in like the Menlo Park, Palo Alto area. So we were kind of where DoorDash started. And I remember getting a DoorDash delivery early, I think it's probably middle school. So I was very aware of the space. And I remember just seeing this and thinking, okay, if I fast forward, 10 years, 20 years from now, I didn't think we'd want to be building the future where you have your kind of neighbor in their old 2001 Toyota Corolla, delivering you food millions of times a day. That felt like probably not the right ultimate solution. It was an obvious starting point. It was an obvious way to like bring the service to people, to bring, food delivery to people. But I don't think the city of the future that we want is one where we have more cars on the road and are kind of tapping into this sort of unsustainable work for most people. So I think it was like an obvious starting point of how robots can be useful. It was an area where clearly had grown a lot, especially coming out of the pandemic, and it was incredibly expensive for both consumers and for merchants. So this was an area where we thought automation would make a huge impact and where it was desperately needed, both from the customer perspective, the merchant perspective, and from the community.
Right, and that's definitely something still very much echoing today and something I hear all the time. Why do we need a 2-ton car delivering a burrito? And also in light of labor shortages and everything going on. Can you dive a bit into the technology behind Coco Robotics? How do these little bots work from getting the order to fulfillment?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways we work with merchants. So each robot's listed on as basically as a driver on both Uber Eats and DoorDash, and we work with some other platforms like Wolt in Europe. And so if the merchant has enabled robot delivery and the customer has opted into robot delivery, then we might get assigned to that order. And so the robot will be told to go pick up the food at the certain restaurant. The restaurant will have a notification and in their POS or their tablet, it will tell them what to do. They'll come outside when the order's ready, put that order in the robot. It will close, lock, and then travel in the most efficient way possible to the customer. And then the customer can unlock it from the app they ordered from. So that's typically how we work with these merchants, is through the marketplace apps. But we also work directly with some merchants where they can plug us into their own app, their own website. They can do phone orders, or we have fax orders in some cases where the order will come in from a bunch of different ways, and then we can deliver to their guests. And that's at a much lower cost than if they were to use, a typical human driver. So they can pass that saving on to their customer, or they can improve the margins for their business, or some combination of that. So yeah, there's a couple different ways to get a robot delivery.
Yeah, well, something food on demand follows very closely. You guys and some other companies out there, and quite a bit of restaurants are, diving into this new avenue. I know recently news out of Coco was your White Castle partnership. Do you want to tell me a bit about some of those partnerships and who you work with?
Yeah, so we launched with White Castle in Chicago, which has been awesome, and that's been powered by Uber Eats. And so when customers go on the Uber Eats app to order White Castle, they have a strong probability of getting a robot fulfilling it. We've worked with a couple different of these QSR more enterprise chains. We work with Shake Shack in Chicago. We've been working with Little Caesars across LA and Chicago, and Wingstop and a number of other major brands. Using robots for delivery can have a ton of operational benefits at the store level. So, and this was really important to White Castle. So you can kind of think of it as like this taxi line of robots that can be organized in front of the store. So when the orders come in, you as the restaurant don't have to manage the drivers waiting to pick up orders and your dining guests and your takeout guests. You can kind of manage the guests that are coming to dine into your store, and then separately, whenever the order's ready, you can go out and hand it off to the robots to then be fulfilled. So that is a lot easier to manage for the restaurant. And it ultimately results in food actually getting out faster to the customer than if it was to go on some shelf and wait for that right driver to show up. This is particularly important in really busy, dense urban markets like Chicago, where it can be very difficult to find parking, where there's a lot of traffic. And so our vehicle is, we've designed it to essentially be like an autonomous e-bike courier. So it is compact. It can use bike lanes and roads and sidewalks. It can get right up next to the merchant location. You can fit 20 of these in a single parking space. So they're really compact, yet they can fit all the types of goods that people get delivered. It can fit 4 grocery bags. It can fit 6 or 8 extra large pizzas. So we really thrive in those environments where it's really dense, really busy, and this is typically where a merchant like White Castle has the most kind of operational complexity to manage. So that's been a huge benefit that we've been able to bring them.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely seeing these pop up in those dense urban areas, as you mentioned. Can you tell me, I think we talked about this before when I interviewed you in the past, but what about the back end that goes into when you choose a city and, what type of things do you have to go through to either map or have those regulations in place?
Yeah, so when we start operating in a city, I mean, we work very closely with the city. There are, about half the states in the country have statewide regulation that supports the operation of this type of vehicle. There's a few countries in Europe as well that have national regulation around this. But everywhere else, we typically introduced the policy. And so we work really close. We work really closely with the city of Santa Monica, the city of Los Angeles. We introduced this policy in the city of Chicago. So working really closely with local elected officials, their constituents, the local business groups there, which could be the Chamber of Commerce and the business improvement districts, and then working with them on what does this program look like? How is it regulated? How do we operate? Is it safe? How do we report on certain things to the city? So basically establishing some clear operating parameters for how we operate. And after a few meetings with the city and their stakeholders, there's usually really good alignment because we're getting cars off the road, we're contributing to pedestrian safety. We can provide really good data on accessibility in areas that aren't accessible or that are obstructed or dangerous. Because if we can't get from A to B, then someone in a wheelchair, someone who's visually impaired can't get from A to B. So, in Santa Monica, we participated in the first zero emissions delivery zone pilot, which was an experiment to try to reduce traffic, reduce congestion, reduce emissions in the downtown area where a lot of the deliveries originate from. So we've had a really awesome relationship with the city at how this can benefit the community. So, and we've done now, in LA and Santa Monica and the adjacent areas, we've done, millions of miles of deliveries and have had, reported on all the success and adoption from the community throughout that. After we have approval and there's a clear policy under which we're operating, then we have to map the city. So going back to accessibility, we need to know where we can route, where we can't route. So we'll create a basic map of where all the sidewalks are, where the bike lanes are, which intersections to use, all this sort of thing. And then once we launch, those vehicles are updating that map in real time. So we're learning, is there a car blocking the sidewalk and we can't get by? Is there a construction zone? Is there a light out? Is there a traffic incident? Is there some sort of crime incident happening? So all of that gets updated in real time so that we can route the fleet to avoid those because we're trying to get hot food delivered to the customer on time. So one thing we've invested in as a company for years is making sure that that product and how the robots work with our human operations team, making sure that's super, super reliable. You do not, no one's going to use your robot if it's going to delay the food a few extra minutes because it will arrive cold, of course. So we had to put a lot of thought into making that product scalable and reliable, and we manage and maintain those maps for every city.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, thinking about what really goes in on the back end and the fact it's updating in real time. That makes sense for who knows what will pop up for a robot on the road. Can you tell me a bit about, if my understanding is correct, that your Coco robots are hybrid, correct? They teleoperated half, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but can you kind of explain to me that back-end technology?
Yeah, so and this is true, I think, for every robotics company, and it will always be true to some extent. You want a system where you can have the AI models doing a lot of the work, but then every time it gets confused or has a higher probability of failure, you do want some human oversight. And so the way we design the system is to be able to drive autonomously in most of the types of conditions that it will encounter. So this is going down the street in rain, snow, sun, doesn't matter, and then crossing most intersections. But of course, in these environments, we're operating the most chaotic parts of the world. So you have a lot of unpredictable things that are hard for the AI models to have to figure out what exactly to do every single time. So you can have the human operator step in, take control of the vehicle, or it can kind of annotate that map to say, hey, this is something we should avoid, or here's how you kind of cross here in the future. That then trains our system to get smarter and smarter over time. And so as we get more scale, more data, and these AI models learn more and more about how to operate, the amount of human involvement should be less. And what that does is it helps us reduce the cost of delivering because I could have one of these operators monitoring a whole fleet at a time because the expected intervention rate is so low. So today we're on some hybrid mix. I think it'll always be a hybrid mix, but the idea is just to have one person have a lot more leverage and they're kind of solving the hardest situations across multiple cities versus watching, a few vehicles at a time. Every company in this space operates that way. Most people don't like to talk about the human operator side because I don't know why it's such a taboo thing in robotics. I think everyone wants it to seem like it's just completely autonomous, but operating completely autonomously isn't actually required. You can get extremely low cost of service and to run it with the highest reliability and the highest quality for our customers. Of course, you're going to want some sort of robot manager who can step in and make sure the food gets on time in the hardest conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you touched on that because it does seem almost all autonomous is all, but at the end of the day, I think it's important to recognize the balance between human and autonomy and the best way to go forward. So we talked a lot about your strategy and where you guys are live. What have you seen in the space right now that is still challenging when it comes to adoption of robotic delivery, or maybe what you're looking forward to seeing improve the next 3 to 5 years or so?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of adoption right now. I mean, there's a couple of things happening in the world all at the same time. The first is I think AI has become very real to everyone. You had ChatGPT come out, and I think that kind of changed everyone's mind of like, oh, well, something's changed. This is clearly capable of stuff that wasn't possible before. Then you started seeing a lot more Waymos on the road, and you could actually go ride in it, and that's something we've been promised for decades. And now it feels like it's finally here. And then you see, every analyst on investor earnings calls asking the CEO for every industry, what are you doing about AI? How is AI going to impact your business? Are you going to be obsolete in a few years because of AI? Right. So I think you have all this hype around AI that I think is justified, but it does set a certain expectation that people are going to adopt it. So we've definitely seen that having a huge impact on our business because now a lot more customers want the product and want it in more places. And so we're trying to ramp up production as fast as we can to get the vehicles and get the service live in more countries and to more business partners. At the same time, as all of that's happening with AI, I think the restaurant industry has a massive need for automation and for cost reduction. there's been a lot of kind of inflationary things happening the last few years. So first of all is inflation on the like raw materials. I mean, the cost of making a lot of the food, importing that food has gone up. Cost of labor has gone up a lot in the restaurant. And then the cost of doing delivery has gone up a lot as well. And it went from being a few percent. I mean, as you guys know, went from doing a few percent of your sales as a restaurant to now double digit percents, in some cases 50%. So that's no longer this like growth marketing channel. That is, a core part of your business. And so it needs to be economical and sustainable for you. So I think there's both been the kind of intensified need for automation in a product like this. At the same time, people believe it's real and that this is the time it's actually going to happen. So that's been really interesting. And we've seen that at the restaurant level, the grocery level, retail stores, platform partners like Uber Eats and DoorDash, the equivalent platforms in Europe. We've seen this from all types of businesses. We've seen this from consumers kind of starting to demand autonomous options and expect autonomous options. And then we've seen this a lot from the cities who are starting to say, well, how does this benefit us? How does this change the way our city works? Is that a good thing? And so working through all those different stakeholders and trying to get the product to be at more scale as quickly as possible has been our top priority. So, we have over 1,000 vehicles today that we're deploying across. Today it's Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, and Helsinki. And next year we're expecting to produce about 10,000 vehicles, and we'll have dozens of more cities on top of that. So we're trying to ramp as quickly as we can to service that, and it's a super exciting time.
Yeah, absolutely. With food on demand, now it seems AI and the talk of automation is in every conversation I have now, where before it was, oh, we're thinking about it. Now it's how do we get ahead and implement it? Our last conference, like I said, every panel is talking about AI or some type of automation. So you're definitely on the cusp of it here. And speaking of that, I've also followed that you've been raising funding. 80 million was your last. I'm not sure if that's the latest up to date, but you do have some big investors. I know Sam Altman, Ryan Graves. What do you think interests them in investing in your company, or in general, any comment on that funding?
Yeah, so we recently announced another 80 million in funding. So the total amount we've raised is over 110 million. That is really to help us with this. There's huge opportunity, huge demand right now. So we're just trying to scale up the fleet and invest a lot more in the autonomy development. Those are kind of the main uses of the funds. We're really interested in international as well. So while we are obviously focused on growing the United States, we've been preparing for a lot of European launches. I think the product fits really well in Europe. Like I was saying, it's essentially this autonomous e-bike courier, and Europe is super dense and runs basically on e-bike couriers for the most part. And so really focused on Europe and the US. But yeah, Sam's one of our largest investors. He invested first in 2020 and then led our Series A in 2021. So this was all pre-ChatGPT. And OpenAI started in, I don't want to speak for Sam, but this is what I remember from those initial conversations is OpenAI actually started in robotics. They were doing AI that could play video games. They were doing robot arms. They were doing a bunch of different things, but it was trying to get these AI algorithms to do useful things in the real world. And they then pivoted away from that in part because they thought it was going to be incredibly expensive to try to develop leading AI models and have to actually make the hardware and collect all the data in the real world. That's like a huge effort, right? All these large AI models were trained on the entire internet's data, which is a much simpler problem than going and collecting that level of data out in the world. So, what I had heard was to be successful bringing AI into the real world, you have to first find a service that can do useful things while you're developing the AI. Find a way to get it to scale so you can collect a lot of that data and have a lot of that human expert demonstration, right? Every time we have a remote operator take over and drive the robot, that's not just training data from the videos, that's training data for how that human expert would navigate one of those difficult scenarios. So you need to love running a hardware fleet out in the real world and not feel like that's a distraction. That needs to be kind of your core mission at first. And so we started by saying, let's figure out how to make this useful to restaurants as quickly as possible. Let's not focus on developing the self-driving tech initially. Let's build a reliable vehicle. Let's build a service. Let's get merchants using it. Let's learn what the merchants need to actually make this useful. Then we can scale it up, and then that data collection feedback loop and pipeline will help us achieve much better AI results a lot faster than if we try to do it with 5 robots in Santa Monica. So I think that really resonated with him because he had just gone through this firsthand. And I think that's largely played out to be true. There's kind of 2 branches in robotics. One is more of, and I think they'll converge, but right now you would typically describe Waymo as being the old school kind of classical robotics stack, where you're identifying people, you're identifying roads, you're identifying cars, you're identifying signs, and then you're creating rules and a plan of how to operate within that detected environment. Whereas the more Tesla approach, and I think what's becoming a lot more popular with these AI models becoming more capable, is just feeding all of the raw data into a big AI model and having it output what to do. So in the case of driving, that would be input all of your video and just output, a steering and an acceleration command. That is cool because all of the complexity is learned. There's no hard-coded rules. There's no, there's not that kind of indefinite R&D cycle of like, what are all the things that failed? Let's go write a rule and make sure that rule doesn't contradict all the other rules. And that's typically how robotics have been done, and it just makes it super hard to scale. But to do that fully learned approach, you have to have a ton of data because you need to, when you're training that AI model, you need to show it examples of all of the hardest scenarios so it can actually learn behaviors and learn why you would stop at a stop sign. Even though you're not telling it what a stop sign is and that you need to stop there, it needs enough examples to understand all the different types of stop signs, why you stop there, what happens if you don't stop there. And so you need to give it a huge amount of data. So with that kind of being the leading way to do AI these days, or to do robotics these days, the key ingredient to that is a ton of data. And clearly Sam saw that coming way before the rest of us. And I think that's largely playing out to be the only way to do this.
Well, I really appreciate that breakdown, and it really helps kind of make things make more sense to, someone who might not follow tech all the time like I do, or, working for a tech company. It's confusing to understand, but that is the difference in what we're seeing come about. So, Zach, you dove into so much fun things about Coco. Is there anything else you'd like to mention about the company, about what you're excited for, or that we didn't touch on?
We have a lot more cities coming up, and I think one thing that's maybe not talked about enough is there's a couple types of modalities in this space. You have drones, you have full-size Waymo type vehicles, and then you have a smaller vehicle like ours. I actually think all 3 of those probably coexist in the future for different use cases. And I think it becomes more obvious why our vehicle looks the way it does if you actually try to walk through the way a merchant would use it in a city. And I don't think this is super intuitive because I think a lot of people wonder, are we going to have Teslas and Waymos doing all of the food deliveries in these urban markets? And I don't think that makes sense for the merchants or for the businesses or for the city. I think we want to be getting cars off the road. I think we want fewer cars. They're heavy and fast, so it poses a huge safety risk to pedestrians to have more cars on the road. They take up a lot more space, both parking space and road space. It keeps emphasizing this cycle where we keep building our cities around cars because they're so important, which makes our cities way less walkable, way less livable, way less safe. So I think a more purpose-built vehicle for delivery makes a lot more sense for the way we want to live in our cities. And then for the merchant perspective, it's really important that the vehicle is compact enough to either go in the store or right next to the store. You could imagine in Manhattan or in downtown Chicago, where does the car park and how does the merchant go out and put the food in the car and how does that experience work? That would be miserable for a restaurant to do. They're so busy and they're managing so many things in their store that the last thing they're going to want to do is leave the store and go find where a car parked. And so I think our vehicle can keep them in the store and can keep them more efficient at taking care of their guests, which is one of the primary jobs and what they probably want to be spending the most time on, and have delivery just be a lot more organized and manageable. And I think this is the best possible form factor to do that, on top of having all these other benefits, like it's much lighter weight and less expensive to operate and less expensive to produce, and it's much safer because it's a smaller vehicle. So I really do think that's the kind of city we want to be building towards in the future, is something that utilizes both this autonomy technology to bring the costs down, but also a more purpose-built vehicle that I think is going to make city life a lot better for everyone.
Well, I love it, and I'm excited to see Coco's journey and in general the adoption of robotic delivery, something I follow very closely at Food on Demand. So, well, thank you so much for diving into everything at Coco, Zach. We are about at our time, but I do like to end with asking a few fun random questions to
Sure.
get to know the guest more outside of your role, if that's all right.
Sure. Sounds good.
So you mentioned already, surfing back in the day. What are you doing in your free time or any hobbies you have if you can find the time? I'm sure you're quite busy.
Yeah, not a ton these days, but I do
Mhm.
try to surf. Our office is in Venice Beach, so we are right next to the water. So I made it as easy as possible for Brad and I to go surfing. But yeah, mostly surfing is all I have time for.
Love it. And what would you say would be one of your favorite places to travel? Maybe that's, when you're over in Finland. I don't know.
Yeah, I love the Nordics. Well, I spent a lot of time there last summer, and then also last winter. It was a lot more fun in the summer than in the winter.
I'm
Um,
sure.
my favorite place to travel is probably Italy. My girlfriend's from Rome, so we go to Rome quite often to see her friends and family. And yeah, I love Italian food, and Italy in the summer I think is probably the best place in the world.
I'm sure. Oh my gosh. Yes, you're making me hungry for some pasta. Okay, last question. We talked a lot about other areas of automation we're seeing. Obviously, you're doing your sidewalk robotic delivery. Is there any future technology you're interested in that you might want to get into or you're just looking at that is exciting in the future?
I think humanoids are going to be really cool. I don't know
Yeah.
how far away it is, and I'm not like a huge humanoid for everything fan. I don't think a humanoid makes any sense for delivering food. I don't think it makes sense for transporting people. I don't think it makes sense for a lot of industrial work. I think there's probably examples where it can work in conjunction with, robot arms and things that are more purpose built. But I do think like home humanoids would be really awesome, to tidy up the house and prepare food and clean things. I mean, it's so much time that goes into these things that are just not that enjoyable of chores to do. So I think humanoids in the home is going to happen. And I think we'll give a lot of people their time back. So I'm personally looking forward to that.
This conversation back in high school, I would have been like, no way, but that can't happen. But now I'm like, nope, that's on the way.
Yeah, it feels like we're getting close. I think
Yeah.
we need to make sure that they're affordable and safe
Yeah.
to put in your home around kids and pets and stuff. But
Right.
it feels pretty inevitable at this point. The way that AI is progressing and these things are getting smarter and smarter and more capable, it's inevitably going to go into the physical world to do all sorts of things like what we're doing. But I think also things in the home, things in factories. Factories are a little invisible to most people, but I think the home part will be pretty magical.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Zach. I appreciate your time and I look forward to chatting again.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.